This video is all about the best areas of Vancouver to live in. If you're moving here from somewhere else, you want a really strong understanding of what this city is like and what each area offers you so you don't move to the wrong spot. And that's what this video is going to help you answer. By the end of it, you're going to have a really good understanding of where you're going to want to move and definitely, more importantly, where you don't want to move. So let's get after it right here, right now. So here we have the City of Vancouver. It's one small part of what we call Metro Vancouver that has 2.5 million inhabitants. The City of Vancouver is the largest in terms of population in Metro Vancouver by just shy of 700,000 people, but it's actually not the largest in terms of area at 110 square kilometers. It has 22 different neighborhoods, but we're not going to get into every single one of those neighborhoods in this video. I want to give you an overview. And so what I'm doing is I'm breaking down the city into its four main components, its four main areas. And we're going to talk about downtown, the west side of Vancouver, East Van or the East Side, and South Vancouver. And we're going to start off with downtown Vancouver. It's the densest location, the very heart of Vancouver. And if you're looking at the City of Vancouver at a map, it's not at the very center. In fact, it's the northern peninsula up at the top there. That is downtown Vancouver. It's tiny, just like the city. It's only 3.6 kilometers squared. That's roughly 15 by 20 city blocks. So you can really walk across it in, maybe it's half an hour, jog in 10 or 15 minutes. Tops. In the middle of rush hour, it could take you half an hour to drive from one end to the other. And so it could be faster just to get out of your car and walk on some days in rush hour. Now, in terms of housing, what do we have in downtown Vancouver? What you have is no houses, or very few of them. The token few are in the West End. But really what you have are a lot of condos and quite a few townhouses. And so those are your real housing options, no matter what part of the downtown core you're looking at, whether it's Yaletown or Cole Harbour or downtown. They all have condos and they will all have townhouses at various price points. Now, in terms of what are the neighborhoods that comprise downtown Vancouver, what are the most popular ones? There are four. They basically offer different things to different people. So it will depend on what you're looking for, whether you're looking for a really high-end luxury type of neighborhood, that would be Cole Harbour. If you're looking for something a little flashy, a little exciting, but not quite at the top end of things, that would really be Yaletown. And then the more traditional kind of higher density part of the downtown core is the West End. But then there's also Gastown, which is, I would say offers a little better value, but you have to be comfortable with the grittiness of what the Gastown area is like these days. Now, if you're interested in more information sort of specific to what it's like living downtown, I do have a video I'll link right up there about the different areas of downtown and what they all are individually. Be sure to check out that video. I'll also put it down below in the description so you can check it out after watching this video. Now, in terms of outdoor access, there's a lot that downtown really offers. And I think it's really headlined by, as you're probably not going to be surprised, but by Stanley Park. And that is a huge draw to people that live in the downtown core. David Lamb Park at the southern end of the downtown core is also a great park, but everything in the city really pales in comparison compared to Stanley Park. It offers something to everyone. In fact, I was just there a couple days ago with my son. We took our bikes down and we rode our bikes around the seawall, spent a little bit of time at Second Beach as well. But it makes for a great afternoon and a great just excuse to spend time with family and do that outdoors. So of course, yes, Stanley Park is really the jewel in the crown for Vancouver Park System. And then we also have the seawall, as I just mentioned, and David Lamb Park. But it's also, the downtown is very convenient to other outdoor areas. And so, you just have to cross the Lionsgate Bridge to the north and you can get right over to the North Shore, to North Vancouver and West Vancouver. And above those cities, you'll find the North Shore Mountains. So we have Cypress and Grouse and Seymour, really quick, easy access into the mountains. If you want to go up and do the Grouse Grind on a summer's day, as I have in my past, or just get up into the mountain, you have gorgeous views overlooking the city from up there, and it's a really quick escape. Really, it just takes about half an hour to get out of downtown and into the mountains, into the wilderness. You can also just drive up to the west a little bit, up Highway 1 to Horseshoe Bay, where you get really quick, easy access to the ferries. Whether you're going out to Bowen Island, to the Sunshine Coast, or to Vancouver Island, it's another great escape from the city that is right at your doorstep. And just a bit further up the Sea to Sky Highway, you're gonna find Squamish, you're gonna find Garibaldi Provincial Park, which again, I was just in a few days ago, hiking with my son to Garibaldi Lake, which is absolutely stunning and gorgeous. And I gotta tell you, my son is a monster. He's just 7 years old, but he hiked those 20 kilometers with ease. And he was putting his old dad to shame a little bit. I think I was probably more sore, definitely more sore the next day than he was. But further than Garibaldi, you'll also have Whistler. And so all the outdoor sort of benefits of being on the West Coast, being in the Vancouver region, when you're living downtown, they're so readily, easily accessible. Beach access is also one of the big bonuses of living in the downtown core. So you have access to Sunset Beach, first, second, and third beach. I wish we could be a little more creative in our naming of the beaches downtown, but there you have it, first, second, and third beach. Really wonderful to just have that right at your doorstep. You can walk, if you're living in the West End, a beach is really just potentially a 5-minute walk away. And that's what a lot of people who live in that area really enjoy. And aside from the beaches, you also have the second beach pool and the aquatic center. The second beach pool is an outdoor pool, one of the pools where I learned how to swim when I was a kid. And the aquatic center is a little bit aged, but it is a big swimming facility that's all indoors. So in the winter months, that's where the people who live downtown can access swimming if they'd like to. In terms of entertainment, there is no better place to be than downtown Vancouver if you like to go out and spend a little bit of money. I mean, really some of the best bars, some of the best restaurants. There are clubs, of course. I don't think the nightlife scene isn't really like, it's no Montreal, it's no New York City, but there are clubs, there are opportunities to go out and enjoy a fun night on the town. The center of that is really the Granville Strip. And secondary would be Gastown. I was just in Gastown last night, hanging out with some friends on a patio on Water Street at Local, and it's a summer's evening. It was about 20 degrees, tons of people out, tons of people just enjoying the night, having a couple drinks on a patio. I can't think of too many better ways to spend an evening, really. And then on top of that, for entertainment, downtown is where you're going to find BC Place Stadium and Rogers Arena. So that's where the Whitecaps play, that's where the BC Lions play, and that's where the Vancouver Canucks play. So in season, you can go to all those activities, and honestly, you're never going to be bored, and you're never going to have, there's always going to be a reason to spend some money if you live downtown. Speaking of spending money, shopping is readily available downtown as well. You got Pacific Center Mall, and then if there's any street that's sort of known for its shopping in downtown, it would be Robson Street. And you got tons of boutiques and fantastic shopping right along Robson. And now, I want to get into some of the pros and cons of being downtown. Not everything's amazing. There are some things to be aware of before you move downtown. It's not necessarily for you, but the big pros that most people love about being downtown is its convenient location. It's really central to everything. Everything in the city is built around its access to downtown. And so, you can get over to the North Shore really easily. You can get out to UBC or to the airport very quickly. The city of Vancouver is not very big, and so being right at the center of it, right at the heart, kind of makes it easy to get from one thing to another if that's what you want to do. And speaking of that ideal location, there's no better place if you want access to the outdoors and you want access to nightlife and shopping. All of the best of the city is really readily and easily accessible from the downtown core. And then there's also the benefit of it just being a vibrant, interesting community. There's always something happening. And so, there's always people hanging out at the park down the street or at the cafe below your building. You'll always have things going on and people around. So I find sometimes people want to be in those really vibrant, interesting neighborhoods where it's never dull, it's never quiet, it's never settled. And so if that's what you want, you can find that in the downtown core and the downtown peninsula. In terms of cons, con number one, and it's really consistent amongst all of these areas, is the cost, but specifically downtown. Downtown drives prices for just about everywhere else. So per square foot, you're going to be paying the most amount of money to live downtown, and specifically for townhouses and for condos. Real quick, if you want help finding the best place to live in the city of Vancouver, if you're thinking of moving here, or maybe you already live here, but you'd like to move somewhere else in Vancouver, I can help you. I've helped hundreds of families in my 15-year career move to the city of Vancouver, and hundreds more move around the city of Vancouver. My contact information is right there on the screen. Reach out anytime. Whenever you are ready, we can begin that conversation. Now let's get back to the video. It can also be crowded, and I was talking about the vibrancy of downtown, and that's because there's people everywhere, but not everybody wants that. And so if you want sort of like a peaceful, quiet neighborhood, it's going to be tough to find. There is an area I can tell you about if you reach out to me, and we can talk more about it in person. But there is some areas in the downtown core that can be actually relatively quiet, but for the most part, just because of the scale and the density of the downtown core, it is an area that you're going to find could be crowded. And despite so many people being around, it can also feel kind of isolating and lonely. And I think sometimes a lot of the people that are drawn to that area, they like being around other people, but they don't necessarily want to interact. So I find there's maybe less of a neighborhood community feel downtown, even though there's so many more people, than there might be in a less dense part of the city. And finally, the last big con for being downtown is really the impact of homelessness and drug addiction, and sort of like the dark underbelly of the city. And that's concentrated on the downtown east side, but it is something that impacts really all over the downtown core because it's so small. So it's a pretty visible part and hard to escape, and you have to be open to that and ready for that. All right, so now we're going to talk about the west side of Vancouver. It's the city of Vancouver is kind of divided along Ontario, roughly Main Street. So there's the east and the west, and the west side is the old city of Point Grey that was amalgamated into one city. It's traditionally sort of the white collar, swankier neighborhood, you could say. The houses are a little bit bigger, the properties are a little bit bigger. There's treed streets. It's aesthetically really pleasing. The types of housing you're gonna find, just as most of the rest of the city other than the downtown core, you are gonna find condos, townhouses, duplexes, and houses. Most of the condos are gonna be to the north, kind of surrounding the areas that are around the downtown core. So areas like Kitsilano and Fairview, and same thing with the townhouses and duplexes. There are exceptions. There are some of those neighborhoods like Kerrisdale and Dunbar that are the more walkable neighborhoods that have a little more density. So there are some condos in some other areas of the west side. But for the most part, a lot of the west side is single family residential or houses. In terms of neighborhoods, I did just touch on this a little bit, but you have what I would say are pretty walkable family neighborhoods, areas like Kerrisdale, Dunbar, and Point Grey. And then you also have sort of denser, less expensive neighborhoods to the north, and I would say less expensive because of the style of housing. There's not as many single family residential homes, and if there are, they tend to be on smaller lots, but you would include an area like Fairview or Kitsilano, those neighborhoods. And if you are interested in exploring neighborhoods on the west side a little more, I'm gonna link a video that I did that has a lot of information about Kitsilano and Fairview in particular in my video about walkable neighborhoods around Vancouver right there. And in terms of the outdoors, the west side of Vancouver is definitely more oriented toward parks and the outdoors in general. To the west, you're sort of bookended by two fantastic parks. To the west is Pacific Spirit Park, which is essentially where UBC is. Tons of trails, tons of areas to explore. You can really get away from everything. When I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time riding my bike or running through the UBC endowment lands, which is another term we have for Pacific Spirit Park. And then to the east, at the eastern edge, you have Queen Elizabeth Park, which is the highest point in the city of Vancouver. It's a bit of a tourist draw. It's an amazing place. I live very close to that park now, and I love spending time going to the Blue Adele Conservatory in the middle of winter, as an example, or the gardens, exploring the gardens in the springtime, or just heading up there for a walk. It's a really beautiful place to explore. We actually also have the seawall. Now I mentioned the seawall in the bit about downtown, but the seawall actually extends sort of on the northern edge of the west side. So it goes through Olympic Village and Fairview and Kitsilano, and it ends at some point, I think it's just past Kits Beach where it ends, but you could pretty much continue along the water all the way to UBC. So there's a lot of waterfront to explore, which is something that a lot of people love about the West Side. My dad, as an example, grew up on the West Side, and as he got a bit older and he had a little more free time on his hands, he went every single day down to the beach and went for a walk. You know, he'd go for an hour and a half every morning, walk right along the beach and the seawall. Absolutely loved that. That was his daily routine, and that's something that a lot of people, you know, that connection with the beach and the ocean is something that a lot of people love about Vancouver. And speaking of beaches, we do have some of the best beach options when you're living on the West Side. And so you have beaches like Locarno, Kits Beach, Spanish Banks. All these beaches are accessible really easily on the West Side, and you still have access to the beaches that are downtown if you would like to. And then there's also some great pools. I mean, the main one that comes to mind is Kits Beach, which is a massive 150-meter long pool. I don't know if you do much swimming, but I have in my life. And when you're used to swimming in maybe a 25-meter pool, and then you suddenly hop into a 150-meter pool, oh my goodness, it's a bit shocking how different that is to swim lengths in Kits Pool. In terms of nightlife, entertainment, there are restaurants and bars. There's not really any clubs on the west side of Vancouver. If you want that kind of scene, you know, you're not very far from downtown. Well, most of the restaurant options are in the denser populated areas like Kitsilano, but certainly areas like Dunbar or Kerrisdale also have some options, but not as much as you're gonna find downtown. One of the unique things that you're gonna find on the west side is quite a few clubs and very exclusive clubs. So if this is something that's in your wheelhouse, in your budget, this would be sort of the area to be focused on. But you have clubs like the Royal Vancouver Yacht Club, the Jericho Tennis Club, the Arbutus Club, and the UBC Golf Club. So pretty much any sport you want to play, you can find your right membership, your right community, and the West Side would be the place for that. We'll get right back to the video in just one sec, but if you're getting any kind of value out of this video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. That way other people just like you will find this video too. The YouTube algorithm will get to work and go and scour the internet for people just like you who are thinking of moving here. And also, if you'd like to see more of me, I do put out videos just like this every single week about living in Vancouver and about moving to Vancouver. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single video. Now let's get back to the rest of the video. In terms of shopping, the second biggest mall that we have in the city of Vancouver that's actually just undergoing a significant renovation is the Oak Ridge Shopping Center. But then for the most part, you have neighborhood shopping districts. So, you know, whether it is Kitsilano on 4th or Kerrisdale on 41st or Dunbar, each of these communities has its own central shopping area. And you're typically gonna find mom and pop sort of local retailers, not too many, you know, there's definitely no big box retailers in those areas. There's a couple smaller big box type retailers on Cambie Street, which is an area that many people on the west side and east side will converge to do some of their bigger shopping. So like a Winners or a Best Buy, Canadian Tire, those types of retailers are in that area. Getting into the pros and the cons of living on the west side, one of the biggest pros I think that has drawn a lot of people to the west side is the feeling that there are the best possible schools, the best education is possible on the west side of Vancouver. And you know, I have talked about education in Vancouver, link right there to a video, I'll put it in the description below. But the truth is that public schools around Vancouver are pretty equal. There's not a huge divergence between the quality of education you're going to have in South Vancouver versus the west side of Vancouver. But there are some of the, you know, longer standing private schools on the west side of Vancouver, St. George's for boys in particular and Crofton House for girls. You know, there's also the idea that I would say it's a little quieter, it's a little more tranquil. And so it is primarily single family residential, but you still have some really highly walkable neighborhoods. So I keep pointing these three out, but Dunbar, Kerrisdale, I could mention Point Grey as well, and Kitsilano are all, you know, typically more single-family residential or relatively lower density, but they have these central business areas where there are shops and services. So you don't actually have to get in your car and drive very far to get to a grocery store or to I don't know, send a package in the mail or something like that. And finally, it's really the access to the outdoors, or just, you know, nature in general. So whether it's the park down at the end of the block, or getting out into Pacific Spirit Park, or going down to the beach, getting onto Spanish Banks as an example in the morning for a walk, or a paddleboard or something. A lot of people that value living in the west side of Vancouver really value that greenery that kind of surrounds them in those options. Now, in terms of cons, the biggest one, once again, is the cost of housing. I feel like a bit of a broken record there, but it is true. And specifically for the west side of Vancouver, it is the priciest real estate, some of the priciest real estate in Canada. So to buy a nice house on the west side of Vancouver, you are paying a premium to be there. There are less expensive options, and those are typically higher density type options, things like townhouses or condos. But there are other areas of the city where those things can be cheaper if you don't mind living in a different neighborhood. Secondly, one of the big cons is it's a bit challenging to get around the city. Currently, there's no SkyTrain to the west side of Vancouver at all. That is going to change within the next year or so. They're currently building a SkyTrain route along Broadway that is going to terminate at Arbutus. So that will change things a little bit. But if you live in Kerrisdale, as an example, and you want to rely on anything but a car, it is a bit challenging. You know, taking a bus downtown from Kerrisdale could take 45 minutes. It's not a short bus ride because it's a bit of a convoluted path down there, and then the traffic can get backed up pretty easily. So having a car is more of a necessity, I would say, and it's a little less convenient to get around, like over to the North Shore or onto the highway to get out of the city. You have to sort of plan on an extra roughly half hour for most of the commutes that other parts of the city make a little easier. So there you have it. Those are the pros and the cons of the west side of Vancouver. And now East Vancouver. East Vancouver is where I currently live, and I've spent most of my adult life after having grown up on the west side. But East Vancouver is generally considered to be the more affordable part of Vancouver. It's a little more blue collar in its history and tradition. That's certainly changed in the last few years. As a result of that sort of grounding, the properties are a little less flashy. Houses are smaller, lots are smaller generally. And the result of being closer together is, I would say, you know, people, there is a bit stronger community network, and you're more likely to be in a walkable community on the east side of Vancouver than really anywhere else in the city. And in terms of housing, once again, you have condos, you have townhouses and duplexes, and also houses. Condos, just as we talked about on the west side, are more likely, condos and townhouses are more likely to be to the north in a ring sort of surrounding downtown Vancouver. So areas like Mount Pleasant, like Commercial Drive, and like Hastings Sunrise. And then houses will typically be a little more likely to be to the south a bit. So areas like Main Street, Commercial Drive, and let's say Renfrew. Now, in terms of neighborhoods, once again, we have some really strong walkable family neighborhoods like Main Street, Fraser, and Hastings Sunrise. And if you're interested in more information about Main Street and Fraser in particular, another term for that area is Riley Park Little Mountain. It's one of the hottest parts of the city. I recently did a vlog about that neighborhood, and I'm gonna put it right there for you. Be sure to check that out after you watch this video. I'll put a link down below for you as well. There are so many fantastic neighborhoods in East Vancouver. This is just one of them. And why do people love living in East Vancouver? Well, a lot of it comes down to, again, access to the outdoors. There's not as many big parks in East Vancouver, but there definitely are an abundance of small community parks. In fact, where I live, there's one just at the end of my block. It's like half a block in size. It has a sports field and it has a playground for kids, and every day, all day, there are families, children playing, children laughing. It's really convenient for me. I can, you know, my kids are a little too young to go and play there on their own, but essentially when kids come home from school, we can just stop at the park for a few minutes, let them play, and then pile in, you know, down the street and get back home for dinner. A couple of the big outdoor spaces that people are focused on in East Vancouver, the biggest one would be Trout Lake, which is the only inland lake in the city of Vancouver and the only swimming lake in the city of Vancouver. Now, just between you and I wouldn't necessarily be swimming there. I don't feel like it's the cleanest water. I'd much rather go into the ocean. They do have, though, a lifeguard in the summer months, but personally, in my 48 years on the planet, I have never gone in the water more than past like my shins. But some people do. Nobody's judging. Nobody's judging. There's also Queen Elizabeth Park on the eastern fringe of East Vancouver. It is technically on the west side. I've spoken about it before, but it's very accessible for a lot of people that live in East Vancouver. And, you know, it's not really a park, but I definitely, in my books, I qualify it as a green space and I view it as a park, but that's Mountain View Cemetery. And I talked about it in some of my other videos as one of my favorite spots in Vancouver. I love the open green space. I love just being able to walk through there. And it's not crowded because it's a cemetery, I guess, but it is stunningly beautiful. And I also I'm like kind of fascinated by the history of Vancouver. So I love, you know, checking out people's gravestones, seeing if I can find the oldest gravestone in there. Incidentally, the oldest one, I believe, is from 1886. So, you know, for Vancouver's history, I know in comparison to Montreal or to Paris, it pales in comparison, but it is a place, if you're a bit of a history buff, you can find some interesting things in there. One that comes to mind is that there is one of the survivors of the Titanic is buried in our graveyard. So is Joe Fortes, somebody, you know, you may not know yet, but people from Vancouver know all about Joe Fortes. And he didn't own a restaurant, but he's a very famous Vancouverite that is buried in Mountain View Cemetery. The only ocean access that we have in East Vancouver, there is one. Not everybody seems to know this, surprisingly, but it is New Brighton Park, very at the far northeastern corner of the city. And it's actually a fantastic park that if it was a bit closer to me, I'd probably spend more time there. But I do love stopping there, and it's got a great playground. The kids love that place, and a really nice little quaint outdoor pool for the summer months. And speaking of pools, there are just great community pools all around East Vancouver, and two of the best would be Kensington Community Center, but my favorite is Riley Parks because it's an indoor-outdoor, and in the summer months, again, you can get outside. And the best part is the hot tub. I gotta say, I hate cold water, so I'm always trying to get my kids into the hot tub. For some reason, they don't really like it, but that's where I'm happiest, when I take my kids to the pool. Now, in terms of entertainment, there's tons of entertainment options. Definitely great restaurants, great cafes, and great bars all around East Vancouver. But it's not catered towards a younger demographic, I would say. It's definitely, you know, more for the 40s and 50s, maybe 30s, 40s crowd, not the 16-year-old to the 28-year-old, not that kind of range. Those guys would not that 16-year-olds should be going out, but they do. But you know, the younger crowd is definitely going to find more of what they want on the Granville Strip, where it's a little, shall we say, more refined, say on Main Street, as an example, or Commercial Drive. Now, in terms of shopping, there are no real big malls in East Vancouver. If you want that, you have to go to the Westside or to downtown. But what we have are some really vibrant communities with fantastic local retailers, whether it's Main Street, whether it's Hastings Sunrise, Commercial Drive. There's tons of places to shop, whether, you know, it's grocery shopping or buying a new pair of jeans or whatever, you can find it. There are some small box, big box retailers, just like every other part of the city. But again, it is almost exclusively smaller, one-off type retailers that you're going to find. Now, in terms of the pros of living in East Vancouver, I feel like I could go on and on about all the pros because it is where I live. So I obviously live here for a reason, because I really love it. But I love all parts of the city. In particular, I think what generally people are drawn by is a sense that of these walkable, community-oriented neighborhoods. And I've been bringing them up a fair amount, but whether it's Riley Park, whether it's Commercial Drive, or whether it's Hastings Sunrise, those are the three big draws. That's kind of, that's what people are looking for and what people are going to get in East Vancouver. They also love the fact that it is very central, both for the city and for the region. So rather, as opposed to the west side of Vancouver, it is much more centrally located. It's easy, very easy to get downtown. It's easy to go south to Richmond, to the airport as an example. It's easy, relatively easy to get out to UBC. It's relatively easy to get onto the highway and get out into the valley or escape to the Okanagan for a weekend. So whatever direction really you want to go in, because of its central location, that's, it's well located. And another thing that people really love about being in East Vancouver is that it offers you all of the benefits of being in the city without actually being in the urban core. Where I live, as an example, I'm about a 15-minute drive from downtown Vancouver. Last night, my wife and I went down to Gastown for an evening, had a babysitter, left the kids at home, and met some friends and had drinks on a patio. And that's 15 minutes away. We also live in a family neighborhood surrounded by houses. A couple blocks away, there's a bunch of condos, and 3 or 4 blocks away is the grocery store and the bank. So we can walk to all of that. We're not in suburbia, but it's a sort of a good balance between the two. And I think that's one of the things that people really love. If you want a family neighborhood, but you don't quite want to be out in the suburbs, you want easy access to downtown, that's what people will find in East Vancouver. In terms of cons, I only have a couple for East Vancouver. Again, broken record, but the cost of housing, it is less expensive than the west side, but it's still not cheap. And so you are going to be finding, in comparison to most of the rest of Canada and most of the rest of the lower mainland, it is a premium to be living in the city of Vancouver. The other big con, I think, is that this area, East Vancouver in particular, kind of has a long-standing stigma attached to it. So as I began this idea that it was a more working class neighborhood, the idea of a good side and a bad side of the tracks, well, historically, this was the bad side. It's definitely an outdated way of thinking. It is not like that any longer. So as an example, the area that I live in right now would be an area that when I was a kid was very rough. Definitely people tried to avoid it if they could. The schools weren't as good. The kids were rough. I remember hating to play against the soccer teams from this area because they were really rough and played a different style of game than I was used to. But today it has transformed. You're surrounded by people that are drawn to the beautiful neighborhood, people that really value education, and a significant amount of gentrification really has happened over the last 30 odd years. And finally, South Vancouver. South Vancouver is kind of interesting. It feels, all these areas feel different, but it does feel significantly different than the rest of the city. And that's because it was really the last area to be developed. So South Vancouver used to be the farming zone, the farming district that supported the denser parts of the city. And as the city grew, the city took it all over. And that really only happened in the 60s and 70s. As we all know, in that period, there was a move to the suburbs and there was a move to the vehicle. And so that area wasn't developed to be walkable. It was developed to be car friendly. And that is one of the big differences that you'll find as you explore South Vancouver. In terms of housing, you definitely have all 3 types: condos, townhouses, / duplexes, and houses. Condos typically are going to be in just a couple pockets. They are in South Vancouver is probably the least common area that you're going to find higher density housing, but 2 that really stick out. One is Marpole on the west side, and Fraserview would be the other in the far eastern corner. That area is just being developed, and between you and I would say it's probably one of the best values in all of Vancouver. Really good quality construction at a very affordable price point. So same thing for townhouses and duplexes. You'll find them in those 2 areas. And in terms of houses, really it's everywhere else. In terms of the outdoors, one of the big differences I'd say for South Vancouver is rather than being oriented to the ocean, it's oriented to the Fraser River, which is directly to the south of South Vancouver, and it's separating the city of Vancouver from the city of Richmond on the other side of the water. There are a number of parks along the waterfront. There is a network of neighborhood parks, but I would say it's not as strong as it is on the west side or in East Vancouver. And there is one large park to the east, just above Fraserview, Everett Crowley Park, which incidentally at some point was the city's garbage dump, but it's been converted to a beautiful park. And I don't know, they have some really good organic soil in there from the garbage, but it's a really dense forest and it's really quite beautiful. A fantastic place to go and walk your dog if you're looking for that. South Vancouver is the place to golf. So really almost all of the city's golf courses are in what we would call South Vancouver. You have Shaughnessy Golf Course, Point Grey Golf Course, McCleary, Fraserview, and Langara Golf Courses, all in South Vancouver. If you're a golfer, you can find, basically a new place to golf every day of the week. Another thing I think that's a little bit of a secret is South Vancouver is home to Vancouver's horse community. And that area is the southwestern corner, just below Kerrisdale, what we call Southlands. And it's, when you go down there, it's like going into a different world. People are riding horses everywhere and they wave to you as you walk by or drive by. It's kind of a cool place. And if you love horses, being close to or in Southlands is going to be definitely high on your list. And then in terms of entertainment, I would say that's probably most limited of all the areas in the city of Vancouver. You're not going to have an abundance of restaurants or bars and really no clubs or anything like that. So generally the stuff that's around would typically be more the chain restaurants, like whether it's a White Spot and Earl's or something like that, or a Starbucks coffee shop. Now there are exceptions, but in comparison to what you're going to find in the other areas of the city. And in terms of shopping, because of that suburban nature and car-oriented lifestyle, there's definitely more in the big box retailer options, and typically you're going to find that along Southeast Marine Drive and Southwest Marine Drive, but places like Canadian Tire, like Winners, Best Buy, and those types of big box retailers are generally along the very southern end of the city. Once again, just like the restaurants, you're much more likely to find businesses that are international chains or national chains rather than local retailers. Okay, so what are the pros and the cons of living in South Vancouver? Pro number one, I would say, is really that it's the most affordable area in the city of Vancouver. So if you're looking for a deal, this is definitely the place to find it. And if you're looking for a deal and you want to stay in the city of Vancouver, I should say. And secondly, your proximity to the southern suburbs, in particular Richmond. So if you love Asian food, as an example, I mean, Richmond has, outside of Hong Kong, has some of the best restaurants that you're going to find anywhere. Obviously, the airport is right there. So if you're a pilot, as an example, or a flight attendant, you're more likely to want to live in South Vancouver. The access to the airport is much smoother. Number three would be that generally, all the homes are just bigger. And whether it's a condo or a house, the money gets stretched a little further. And so houses are bigger, but also the properties are bigger. And if that's something that you're looking for, you're gonna find that in South Vancouver. In terms of cons, I kind of, stressed this at the beginning, but it definitely has more of a suburban feel. And if that's not what you want, if you want a more walkable community, that's not really what you're going to find in most of South Vancouver, which ties into con number two, just being more car reliant. And these communities generally are not walkable. And so people who value that generally are not drawn to South Vancouver. And that's con number three, is that being less walkable. So, it's more suburban, you're more car reliant, and generally it's just less walkable. So there you have it, our tour of Vancouver and the best places to live, both the good and the bad. I hope you have a really strong understanding of some of the areas of the city, what's good about them, what's bad about them, where you'd love to live, and where you definitely don't want to live. If you want to have a little more in-depth conversation with me and you're thinking of moving to Vancouver, reach out anytime. My contact information is right there on the screen. I've helped hundreds of families move here, and I can help you as well. And if you really enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. if you got any kind of value out of it. And if you want to see more of me, I do put out videos just like this every single week. Hit that subscribe button and you're not going to miss a single one of my videos. Speaking of videos, I think you might like this one over here. That's my tour of Riley Park Little Mountain that I did just a little while ago. And then this video over here, if you're curious about what the cost of living in the Lower Mainland is like, check out that video. That's my most up-to-date cost of living video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on next week's video.